If there is a hi-fi manufacturer that knows how to release products that make you say wow out loud the first time you see them, it's definitely HiFi Rose. I have had my eye on HiFi Rose products for some time, and I've had to wait really patiently to get my grubby mitts on them. And in particular, their amplifiers, they have some design attributes that I've really been interested to listen to, and that is their use of GaN FET or gallium nitride amplifier technology, because that's been claimed to be a better Class D amplifier technology. But HiFi Rose classify their amplifiers as Class AD. And I have both the RA180 and the newer, more affordable RA280 here because I wanted to experience both and share my thoughts with you on the differences, as there is a big difference in price. And the RA180 was HiFi Rose's first ever released amplifier. So what does that mean? Could a Mark II be the better amplifier, even though it costs less, purely because of time? Because, of course, manufacturers are always learning. And if you want my quick synopsis here, I can think of a fair few reasons why I would recommend the more affordable 280 to you over the 180. But let me tell you, the 180... wow, it's definitely one of my favorite amplifiers, one of my most preferred amplifiers that I've reviewed in a long time. And it's one of those situations where I can't quite quantify my head with my heart, but there's something really special about this RA180. But maybe I feel like this because I remember vividly the first time I saw a video of the 180. I think it was on Facebook. I saw a short video clip just like the one I'm showing you now. And I was amazed to see something like this on a hi-fi amplifier. And I half expected to see the typical hi-fi thing where a manufacturer releases this hugely expensive statement product, and I would have been fine with that, of course. And in a way, I was a little disappointed when I saw the 180 in the flesh for the first time, because it's not this huge thing. It's actually quite a normal sized amplifier. And also the fact that, yes, that lovely volume control, it really is lovely, but I think it kind of gets lost on the front faceplate because there's so many other interesting buttons and switches and knobs for you to press. And I think it actually looks more like an airplane cockpit control panel, really, more so than an amplifier. And I can see the look splitting opinion as a result. But there's no way anybody can dispute the build quality of this amplifier. The casework, the chassis, the way it feels in your hands, it's really solid and heavy. Not a Griffin amplifier heavy, but still, really heavy thing. And all of the buttons and the switches, everything that you interact with, it all feels really well built and particularly lovely. Especially when you change the input using the remote control. And there is nothing new there, of course, but the way the 180 does it, it just feels a little more cool for some reason. Maybe it's the funky noise that it makes, or maybe it's just the way that it moves. For some reason, this just captivated me. And I definitely love the top plate. It feels very Luxman to me, and I don't mind that at all, but it also feels very luxury. The rear of the amplifier I found very confusing at first because of all of the speaker cable terminals. And this is the first amplifier I have felt I needed to read the manual before I could even get music playing. And that is because the RA180 has two sets of amplification built in. So you can bi-amp your speakers, or you can power your speakers and amplify a set of super tweeters, and it will change its frequency response to cater for that, which is really interesting. Or you can double up the power by bridging the channels. And this is, of course, very important to select correctly using a very small switch at the bottom, but it's also very important that you wire up the amplifier correctly per the mode that you set. And I found this very easy to get wrong because I did get this wrong at first. So don't do the typical man thing, definitely read the manual first. And also pay attention to the modes. So the mode BTL is the same as bridged mode. So that will run both sets of amplifier channels, bridged mono for more power with like a more traditional normal amplifier output. But you have to wire up unusual. You have to wire up in the same way you would with bridged amplifiers. So this is all confusing, right? Definitely read the manual first. And there is also an independent input for both moving magnet and moving coil cartridges for the built-in phono stage, which seems super strange to me because you can adjust the phono stage curve for different record pressings, such as changing from the rear curve to the Decca curve or the Columbia. But there are no options for changing the moving coil input sensitivity. So I assume HiFi Rose are assuming vinylistas will use, I think they're called loading plugs, aren't they, to change the impedance. See, I don't have any of those and I don't fully understand how that works as someone who's fairly new to playing vinyl. So I did find the phono stage here to be a little bit confusing. Now, when you run the 180 in BTL or bridged mode, you kind of have a preamplifier with bridged mono amplifiers all in the one fairly small chassis, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, but super cool at the same time because there is a lot of very clean power on offer here, 400 watts per channel into 8 and 4 ohms, and this is driven from a maximum 1.1 kilowatt SMPS power supply. So when you break it down, you have an interesting package here with an amplifier with a lovely, very, very custom, solid, beautifully built chassis with all these lovely custom controls and switches, a custom remote control, custom amplifier modules, and custom everything really going on here. It's a really lovely overall package, and we are getting a very flexible package, flexible for the phono stage in its own crazy way, and flexible for how you use this amplifier in active mode or bridged mode. You know, it's super flexible. And if you just run it in bridged mode, you have essentially a pre and bridged monoblock amplifiers all in this one amplifier package. It's a hell of a lot going on here for the asking price of £5,499. So that is a big chunk of hi-fi money, but that's a lot less money than I was expecting to see the first time I saw that really very, very lovely volume control video. But all of this is just bling, right? Unless the sound quality matches up. So let's talk about it. And I'm sure many of you would have already listened to the RA180 because it's been available to buy for a couple of years now. It'd be interesting to see whether your experiences match up to mine, and maybe there's a few things that I experienced that maybe you haven't, so that could be interesting for you. But of course, vice versa. If there's things you think I've missed, please do let me know down below in the comments section. The first very important thing I found is just how important it is to let the amplifier warm up to get its best sound quality. And you can do that quicker by playing music through it and just turn the volume off. The second is how important the tone controls are. And lastly, vitally important, is the DAC's output voltage. So let's start there. I found using the Chord Hugo TT2, I got a much better sonic result, lower in its output, using its low gain preamp feature. I preferred to lower the signal going into the 180 and then raising the volume more from the amplifier, turning the amplifier's volume up rather than the other way around. That seemed to give me the best results with the SVS Titan speakers. Next is the usefulness of the tone controls. Now, normally tone controls are a dirty word for an audiophile, and quite often I test them and prefer to turn them off. But here, Rose have developed a proper active circuit specific for the tone controls, and they have even plotted a series of graphs that you can look at in the manual showing the behavior change and exactly what the tone controls do. When do you ever see anything like that? So I used them, and I preferred the bass to be up just a little bit, maybe like what would be classed as 1 decibel or 1 marking across. And I also preferred the treble to be down just a little bit, maybe 1 again. And the effectiveness and the way the tone controls work and how that affects the overall sonic balance, for me, was the difference between me liking the amplifier and really liking the amplifier. And I'll obviously get into why. But the first sonic thing that stands out about this amplifier, and it really stands out, is I'm going to use the word intensity. Like there's an immediacy, there's like an energy, like a raw energy about how music is delivered from this amplifier. Like this live, raw, unfiltered edge. Like it's just so lively and energetic music is from this amplifier. It's really stand out because it's really rare. And the only amplifier setup that I can remember having anything like this kind of energy was the Griffin Essence pre and power amplifiers that I reviewed earlier this year. That's a 40 grand pre-power that's absolutely amazing and immense. And it has that same kind of rawness, this raw energy and liveliness to it in its pure class A mode. And it's really stand out, like I said, I'm going to say it again, it's really stand out because it's really rare. And I've struggled to describe it in that review. I'm going to try to do the same here. It's not easy to describe. What it sounds to me like is there is less of a filter between you and the music happening in the room. You feel closer to the music, that old chestnut, but it's not like you feel physically closer to it. It just feels like there's less of a filter between you and the music or on the music having some kind of effect to it. And that means it has like more of like this raw, lively energy and energetic nature to it. Like it's vivid. It's like it's hard to describe. It's like, it's got this lively energy about it. And I can see in some rooms, some systems, some speakers, people not liking that. It's one of those sorts of strengths that, you might really, really like or maybe not so. But let me tell you, if you get things right, if you get everything right working with the system, it can be absolutely phenomenal. And I think that is because the way music is presented with what seems like extended dynamic range. And most importantly, with more space or spatial information. I would go far as to say bass is this immense thing that's happening in your room. Well, it is from the SVS Titans, that's why I really like those speakers. But with the 180, it's like this immense, intense, awesome thing that's happening in your room that's like underpinning the music. But that's the critical thing, and what I noticed about this amplifier, the bass always feels like it's kind of low down. And I'm thinking mostly when I listen to like drum and bass or dance type music, the bass feels kind of lower down in the soundstage, like it's more in the lower areas as we kind of listen to the whole sound. And there's some pros and cons to that, but what it does as a pro is it keeps space within the soundstage. So the bass doesn't congest or kind of thicken or fill out the middle of the soundstage. So it always feels like there's a lot of open space for you to kind of listen through, but there's still a lot of bass happening, underpinning that sound with a lot of energy, ridiculously tight and articulate bass. And then the high frequency sound extended. So the height of the sound in the room feels taller and it can feel more out into the room or more go away from you. Really, it just feels more spatial, like there's more spatial cues happening in the music. To try and give you an example of this, sometimes with some music you'll sit there and you'll look at it happening in front of you, and sometimes it's presented kind of back or beyond the speakers. And I can give you a music example of this with Lady Blackbird's album with Did Somebody Make a Fool Out of Me? You only get this on the special edition of this album. It's a great track, demo test, beautiful track, because you have a double bass player at the beginning of that track sat slightly off center, slightly back right. Now with the RA180 and the SVS Titan speakers, the height of that double bass, like the size and scale of that instrument was taller than I've ever heard it happen before. Like it sounded more like there was an instrument in the room because it had the extra height information. And also like the energy and the immediacy and the detail and the articulation of the playing of that instrument was really stand out. Like I said, it has this lively raw energy, less filtered sound, more so than I'm used to. And of course, that's really impressive. And later there's a piano back left as you look at it, and that has the same kind of spatial cues. So like the spatial cues of the music from the 180, it's really stand out and really impressive. And it feels like you have more space to the soundstage, or just more spatial information happening in the same physical space, right? The speakers haven't moved, the room size hasn't changed, and yet you're hearing more spatial cues behind the speakers, maybe out into the room with different music. So that is all really impressive. However, there is a but here. And the but for me is that the overall sound I found to be just a little too on the edge. And also it was all just a little bit too lean for me. What I said about the bass, the fact that it's always just this underpinning, it doesn't quite make its way up into the vocal region, which leaves the vocals sounding just a little bit cold and just a little bit hard for me. Even though they sound really big, really grand, really clear and really energized. And yes, the vocals do have this lovely raw edge about them that some people might love, but for me, the vocals and the whole sound really just lacked a little bit of tonal colour and sweetness. However, you can bring some of this into the sound with those tone controls. So that little raise in the bass I found just filled out the bass just a little bit more, made it more powerful and dynamic, but it just raised it up a little bit more into the vocal region just to make them sound a bit more fleshed out and a bit more pleasing. And then the treble reduction just softened off the sound just a little bit, because you don't want to take it away too much because it's such a great part of this amplifier, but like you just find the right balance where you take a little bit off just to soften off the top of vocals. So you add a bit more at the bottom, take a bit off the top, and that made the vocals sound more pleasing to me, just a little bit more calm and relaxed, and then with even more driving punchy bass. So that to me was like finding the best balance overall from the amplifier. And again, I'm amazed at how well those tone controls worked, how I could just tweak it, look and listen. And when I'm talking about that, one of the things I love about the amplifier design is the tone controls use a light. There's a light that comes out of them and shines on the mark where you adjust them. And the fact that you can see the light so clearly and like make a slight adjustment to go 1 or a half, the fact that light does that is a really very, very cool part of this design. But this is definitely not your lazy Sunday afternoon listen. This is an energetic, lively, upfront listen, like really raw and energized. Like I said, like there's less of a filter between you and the music. And a filter can sometimes be a good thing. It can, make music sound pleasing or lush or warm and soft and all of these lovely things. But sometimes those lovely things come with some compromises to, traits A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z. So these are all really interesting things to think about. So you can probably tell the RA180 has left its mark on me, and I'm holding that thought until I get a chance to listen to it with the new HiFi Rose RD160 DAC that I have my name down to review, because I also have here Rose's flagship music source, the RS130. So it's going to be super interesting to listen to it as a whole system. I'm really looking forward to listening to this amp with the HiFi Rose DAC. But even as it stands, this has been a seriously impressive amplifier. Time to talk about the newer and more affordable amplifier from HiFi Rose, the RA280. And it costs £2,999. So still a serious chunk of hi-fi money, but only about half the cost of that of the RA180. And yet it still has a lot that is the same. It still has the same design DNA, which you can clearly see by the look of the amplifier, and it still has the same VU meters and the same look and design of tone control. So that is all really nice, but it does feel very much like a scaled down amplifier. The chassis is still nice, but it's not anywhere near as nice as the 180. It just doesn't feel as heavy, doesn't feel as luxury and as lovely. Still lovely, but not as lovely. And the volume control is more of a normal volume control. It's not the eccentric one that we see in the 180. I'm sure a lot of people will be absolutely fine with that. And we also don't get the remote control that adjusts our input in quite the same fancy way. And speaking of the remote controls, this is the 280 and this is the 180, and hopefully you can see the difference. The 280 is, again, a very scaled down remote control just in terms of the buttons, and I wasn't expecting that. I expected to see the same remote control for everything, because that's often what we see with a lot of consumer electronics products. You expect it to be cheaper to manufacture all the same. So the fact that there's two different amplifier remote controls for the different amplifiers, I don't know why, I just like that attention to detail. And on the rear, I like that it's a much more simple affair too. You don't need to read the manual here to get wired up and music playing, and there is a kindness in that to my simple brain. We still get a balanced input that I really appreciate, a subwoofer output, the same as on the 180, and I think enough single-ended inputs for flexibility. And there is a moving magnet phono stage built in, which could be great for some. And for power, 250 watts into 8 and 4 ohms of, again, GaN FET based Class AD running off a 500 watts SMPS power supply. And I put the 280 into my system with everything the same. And this is an interesting amplifier for a few reasons. Firstly, I had the same issue as before with the Core TT2's DAC output from its balanced seemingly being too high, as I was getting some distorted sounds coming through. So I did the same thing again. I lowered the Core TT2's volume down, or really its voltage down, and then compensated by turning the 280's volume up more, and that gave me a lot more control in the volume. And I found getting the volume up more was the key or the secret to unlocking the best performance from the 280 in terms of getting the best bass control, like dynamics and bass control. So that would definitely be my recommendation. Again, lower input signal in, turn the volume of the amplifier up. Here is the big difference for me between the 280 and the 180. I think the 280 has been designed with some bass bloom built into its sound character, just a bit of bloom. And the reason I say that is because, well, I could hear it straight away, but like having a bit of bass bloom, what that does is it adds a bit of fullness to the sound. It thickens out the bass. It makes the bass a little bit more warm, thick and bouncy. It kind of fills up the sound more from not just the floor, it fills the sound up into the middle as you kind of look at the whole sound. It fills the room more with bass pressure and feeling, and you feel it more on your body as a result. And that just makes the whole sound warmer and more pleasing and more full. Fullness is nice, but it can kind of creep into the middle of the soundstage just a little bit. But like in isolation, if you listen to this amplifier, you'll go, wow, this has got really a lot of really nice quality, warm, pleasurable, pleasing bass. It's really very standout, and it's very controlled, and it's very articulate, again, especially if you get the volume control up. And like the word bloom sounds like a dirty word, but it's really not actually. The bloom can help to flesh out the sound for the vocals as well, which it does here. Makes the vocals sound really nice and pleasing and warm and full. And also, I think it makes this amplifier less fussy for speakers, less fussy for DACs and other components in the system, rooms and stuff as well. So like this more full, fleshed out, warm, bloomed type of bass. Yeah, it's as much of a pro as it is a con. Like the con would be, it affects soundstage space. But again, I don't think you're going to notice that in isolation, only if you compared it with an amplifier like the 180. And the vocals in particular from the 280, they're just really nice. They're very clear, they're very detailed, they've got nice tonal kind of fullness to them, and they're just pleasing. Pleasing in every way. Detailed, not too detailed. Warm, but not too warm, right? They're just nice, really nice vocals. Well, that's the same for male and female vocals, regardless of the volume. And I think that's definitely helped by the treble delivery from this amplifier, which is very play it safe. And that can be a good thing because, again, it makes this amplifier sound very warm, very pleasing. Don't get me wrong, there's still a nice amount of treble detail, but it seems very play it safe, again, compared to the 180 that's very kind of, like lively in that regard. And I think that means it's going to, again, make this amplifier flexible and less fussy for the speakers that you use it with, and also the room, right? If you're listening in a more echoey, reverby type of room, this type of sound will just work better for you because it's just nice, right? It's like a nice, pleasing sound. But this particular room is very acoustically treated, right? There's a very low reverb in this room. So I have found the treble to be just a little bit too play it safe. And I just found it was softening off the edges of the music just a little bit too much for me, where, sound just wasn't cutting through well enough, or it wasn't quite as precisely delivered as I would like. So I used the tone controls and I adjusted the treble up, I think about 2. I don't know if it's 2 dB or just 2 marks, or it's not clicks because it doesn't click, but like 2 points where you see the light go across. Now that for me was it. That was enough. And I used the track Shacked Matt by Real Tons Vanna, with the aim of getting all of the vocals, because that whole track is just vocals, to get them all to sound clear and as crisp as possible in as much of a 3D space as possible without overdoing it to the point where vocal sibilance would sound harsh. And the tone controls are really amazing here because the sound of the amplifier responds perfectly to how you adjust them. And tone controls never normally do that. They normally make the sound worse. So I'm super impressed by how this has been designed by HiFi Rose. And in isolation again, the soundstage, organisation, space and layering of the 280 is really very good. And I find it to be a nice mixture of like a pleasing full bass with good separation and just a nice overall organised, very enjoyable musical sound. This is again where there is a really big difference between the 280 and the 180, because the 180 just does a much better job of creating spatial information or giving you spatial cues, and it makes you feel like you're listening in a larger space, even though the space is exactly the same. It's the same room, it's the same speakers. The spatial cue information of the 180 it's outstanding. It's so exceptional that even a good amplifier like the 280, like it's a very obvious step down in that regard. But here's the kicker: the 280 is the more easy amplifier to listen to. It's more relaxing, it's more easygoing. It's definitely a listen to music every day of the week, even a Sunday afternoon matinee type of listen. It's really a nice, pleasing, but not bad. Like not bad for that. It's lively, it's energetic, it's clear, it's detailed, but like it's also got like a nice sweetness going on as well. It's a really nicely balanced amplifier. And I wanted to compare the 280 to a Class AB amplifier, as close in price as I could. And I have the excellent Audiolab 9000A here. And I really just wanted to see if I could hear any obvious differences between what I'm going to class as very long established Class AB amplifier design, because I know who's designed that, and the Audiolab, it's a guy who's been doing it forever, compared to like the new GaN FET Class AD. Was there any obvious kind of negatives really, I suppose, of the GaN FET design? And yes, of course, I could hear differences between these amplifiers, but not in the ways that I was expecting. So I chose the track Mental State by John Jan because it's a very aggressive percussive guitar track. And I found that with the 280, with my slight treble increase, I could hear fantastic detail in terms of John Jan playing the guitar, like in terms of the fretwork up and down. I think it's the neck, isn't it, of the guitar? That was really clear and really defined. But it had like a bit of a twang, a little bit of a twang going on to the sound, which I wasn't sure if that was resonances of the guitar or was it like a negative side effect of this, Class AD, which is essentially Class D amplifier design. So comparing to the Audiolab was fantastic. And interestingly, the Audiolab sounded even more twangy than the HiFi Rose, but with less detail, with less, like it was a bit more fuzzy. It wasn't as clear, wasn't as precise, but there was definitely no negatives that I could hear from the Class AD, from the HiFi Rose compared to the Audiolab. I could just hear where the HiFi Rose was the better amplifier, clearer, more energy, more focus, more information really coming through from the more expensive amplifier. So I did the same test through lots of different vocal tracks, and it was all pretty much the same. I could hear where the HiFi Rose was the better amplifier in all the key areas that we would listen for: bass, dynamism, soundstage, space. And given its higher price, I think that was justified. But most important to me, I could not hear any negatives, not one negative of GaN FET Class AD compared to Class AB. It was like I wasn't hearing the differences between those technologies. I was just hearing the differences between the amplifier qualities and designs overall. So that was really very interesting. So to sum up then, this very long video, I have massively enjoyed this experience. It's been really fun and great for me to spend some real time with these HiFi Rose products. I'm starting to get to know them much better. And I think it's an easy sum up for me for the Rose RA280. It's a really cracking amplifier that ticks all of the right boxes really, I think, at its price. Bass, soundstage, nice warm, pleasing character. You can adjust its sound with the tone controls. It's really nicely built. It's not crazy heavy, doesn't generate crazy amounts of heat. It runs, pretty efficiently. So I think in the modern world, it really is, the modern hi-fi market, the HiFi Rose 280 really is the overachiever amplifier. And that's going to be really interesting to a lot of people, like the real big bang for buck products. So that's an easy one to recommend. But the 180, oh, that's a difficult one to sum up, because in some regards it's absolutely outstanding. And for those reasons and the ways it's absolutely outstanding, it's made a real mark on me. And I want to go back to it. I want to listen to it more and play with it a little bit more, to see if I can't like eke out, real mind-blowing, outstanding performance. It's that good of an amplifier in those key areas. However, I wouldn't mind seeing a Mark II version of it that's just made much more simple. Maybe even taking out the active crossover, maybe even taking out the phono stage to make it still have that lovely chassis, but maybe a more simplified version where the volume control becomes more of a standout thing. Maybe, I don't know, but definitely keeping, the pre and bridged mono amplifier design, maybe making that more simple to wire up. Keeping the same bass, man, the bass from that amplifier is incredible. And the height and the sense of space, that's all magic. Maybe if there could be just a sprinkle of sugar on the overall presentation, especially in the vocals. If the vocals could be just a bit more tonally rounded and rich, just like they are from the 280, kind of like that, then you know what, you'd have an industry-wide mega knockout amplifier at the price. But even taking all that away is still exceptionally good. And of course, I haven't heard it yet with the HiFi Rose RD160 DAC. That to me is super exciting. And of course, that will be coming in the near future. So look, it's been a long video. I've tried to pack it out with as much useful information for you about these two amplifiers and the key differences, because they're both excellent in their own way, but they're really different amplifiers. Yes, they share some things in common, but actually fundamentally they're very different sonically. So, pay attention to that. And if you've enjoyed this review, if it's been helpful and useful, please hit the thumbs up and of course subscribe to the channel to see lots and lots more.